Okay.
I think it is.
Looks like we're live, no pressure. Hello, world.
So hello, everyone. I think we can get started now. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. So welcome to our session today. For those joining us, this is the Funding and Capacity Building Local Enterprise Support Organizations to increase the effectiveness and resilience of ecosystems. That is a session that we are on today. So for the next 1 hour, we're going to have a conversation with all the people that you can see on your screen. So my name is Mary Mwangi. I work as a program manager with the Algirias Foundation, and I am based in Nairobi. I am going to hand it over to the rest of the panelists to quickly introduce themselves, and I will pass it over to Devin. When you introduce yourself, pass it over to the next person.
Hello, everyone. Good morning from Washington, D.C. My name is Devin Chesney. I'm the Director of Strategic Development for ANDI, the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. And I will pass it to Andy, who is next to me on my screen.
Thanks, Devin. My name is Andy Bryant. I'm the Executive Director of Siegel Family Foundation, a private philanthropy born in the US and very much African-led at this point, with the majority of our teammates, grantee partners, and grant decisions happening in East and Southern African offices. Thank you. I'll hand it to Peter.
Thank you very much, Andy. Good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Nawa, and I'm the entrepreneurship lead at Bongo Hive, based in Lusaka, Zambia. Bongo Hive is an innovation and technology hub. I'll pass it on to Lillian.
Lillian, you're on mute.
Oh, apologies for that. My name is Lillian Mwai, and I'm a Senior Partnerships Manager at the Africa Management Institute, and I'm based in Nairobi. I oversee and facilitate our partnerships across Africa. The Africa Management Institute is a Pan-African social enterprise that enables ambitious businesses to grow. We work with African SMEs and local ESOs, and through our programs, we have reached 39 countries in 7 years. I'd like to pick on Barbara to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Barbara Birunji Mtawazi. I am a co-founder of Hive Collab. I am the managing director, co-managing director. We've been around for the last 10 years, 11 years now. We're a co-working space and incubation space. Excited to be here, and I pass it on to Rachel.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm Rachel, Director of Special Projects at Village Capital. I've been with Village Capital for 5 years, originally based out of our Nairobi office. We are a global capacity development and funding for entrepreneurs and local entrepreneur support organizations working in impact. And I'll pass it back to Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So a quick just housekeeping note for the ones who are joining the session through the conference platform. as we continue having the discussion, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask any of the panelists or you'd like us to react to, please put those in the chat. Then we will pick them up at some point in the conversation. So thank you. So in today's session, we have a good group. So we have a representation from 2 local ESOs as they've introduced themselves. We have 2 ESOs that are involved in capacity building for ESOs, and we have funders and ecosystem builders also represented. So the challenge that we're discussing today and the solutions is one that is well known to everyone in the ecosystem, really. That it's very difficult for locally led ESOs to get the funding that they need to run their programs and to improve on their work and scale on their work as well. So we are going to be discussing what those challenges look like and some of the solutions that have been tested around addressing that dearth in funding to local ESOs, and also to discuss what else needs to be done. So I'm going to jump right into it and invite, let me start with you, Barbara. Tell us about your organization and the journey of getting Hive Collab to where it has been with regards to fundraising.
Thank you so much, Mary. We started out in 2010, pretty much when there was not so much of an entrepreneurship ecosystem or even young people looking at creating their own work opportunities. It was more of everyone looking for a job. So when we came in and also focusing on technology, which at that point in 2009-10 wasn't such a big deal. I remember we went the first 2 years without successfully raising any grants or any money. And we were running a software development consultancy, which we were now phasing out into a tech hub. And so the first 2 years was quite a struggle until we got our first funder who came in, Indigo Trust, who, when they came in and visited and saw what we had done for 2 years without any funding, then they were open to funding. But still, beyond Indigo Trust, it was quite hard to get anyone, especially locally, to believe in what we were doing, but also internationally, being based in Uganda, it wasn't that easy for us to raise money at that point, both for the hub or for the entrepreneurs that we are supporting. Yeah.
And Peter, what about you in Zambia? Is this a similar experience, or what has your experience been like at Bongo Hive?
Thanks very much, Mary. It's been pretty much the same, almost parallel to Barbara, because we started in 2011. And when we began primarily as a technology hub, helping to fit or support tech people with technology. But then we realized that they didn't have the business end of it. So you find people would build these solutions, these websites, these apps, but they didn't know how to sustain them or have that business acumen. And that's how we introduced the entrepreneurship end in 2015. And we also got funding. Thankfully, it was multi-year. Therefore, we're able to structure programs that people could, first of all, get to know would happen either every 2 months, every 3 months. There were structured programs for early stage and all the way to growth stage, and that supported it. But as you know, as you are growing and with funding, it would come to an end. And there's always been now an issue of, okay, how do we continue running the organization and get the funding? I think I'll probably end there.
Mary, Barbara here, just to add on to what I had said earlier. Also, one of the biggest challenges for us was getting funders. Along the way, more funders started joining us, but these were pretty much limited funding or project specific or program specific, that sometimes we found you actually have money to run a project, but you don't have to pay. You don't have the money to pay the people who are behind in the background running the program. So we found it quite difficult to continue running a program if the people that are behind here trying to get it to work are not paid or are not even happy with what they're getting. So it's been a bit of a challenge and a pull and tug and kind of deciding, do we go with this funding, or yes, it seems nice, but we won't be able to actually operate if we take it, so let's just leave it. So it's been that kind of struggle of what can we leave? Do we go with what the funder is saying and just do what will please them rather than what we know is going to work within the communities that we are working? So there are those difficulties where sometimes we've had to say, okay, this is just not going to work. It's good money, but let's just let it go. or we've said this would just be a program that we are going to do for just this particular time, but in terms of it being part of where we want to go, it is not. We've also had funders kind of come and dictate what you should be doing. Like, oh, for us, we want you to do this with our money. Can you do it or not? And because sometimes as a hub, one, you want to stay in operation, you want to stay running, you're like, yeah, let's just take this. Yeah. Okay.
So what you're describing is the most common type of funding that's available out here, which is restricted funding. And at this point, I'd like to bring Andy in. If you could tell us maybe what Seagull's approach is to funding locally led organizations, especially the ones that are working with enterprises.
Sure, thanks, Mary. Yeah, at Seagull Family Foundation, we have learned through a lot of mistakes, and we'll call it trial and error to sound a little bit more scientific, but we've come to the realization that multi-year general operating support is the way that we would elect to go. Breathing room, right? I think oxygen is something that all living organisms and organizations need. And for us, unrestricted funding over a little longer runway is that. We've also found that with capacity building, it's a tricky space, right? Even those words tend to trigger people at this point. So whatever we want to call it, when we've sat down with our partners and felt like we've had an honest dialogue, usually after years of partnership, when we ask the simple question, what is the form of capacity support that you desire? The number one answer is, we'd actually just like more money. We'd like more unrestricted money. We'd like longer money, so more multi-year funding, and we'd like introductions to other people with money. And then we want some strategic planning support, and then we want some financial management modules and so forth. So it's interesting too that Peter and Barbara, the resident agonizers over sort of capacity support, what's needed, what's wanted, both mentioned funding challenges first and foremost in their introduction remarks. So we found that generally you want to do a good job of your diligence. You want to identify awesome local trusted actors. In our case, you want to give them unrestricted funding and largely get out of the way. And any non-financial support you provide is very much at their behest. And I think that only comes in relationship building that every funder talks about and desires is a product of delivering on promises and tenure, right? So there's no substitute for just putting in the hours and the sweat equity and doing what you say and saying what you do, right? To build that sort of desired halcyon relationship in which funders and donors and doers are actively engaging one another. So that's what we found works. And so, like I mentioned in my intro, the way we've done that has been pretty straightforward. We've hired up awesome, talented teams on the ground. And Barbara, I have to say, by the way, I was just sitting with our new Ugandan program officer, Twasima, this morning, a place that we've not had local boots on the ground, rock stars, and we now do. So we've got local offices in 5 countries in which we focus, and that's made all the difference for us as a relative outsider trying to do something smart and good in the context of East and Southern Africa and supporting ESOs and others.
Okay. So Andy you've raised some really interesting points there. So from your own experience, you've tried to have local teams on the ground, you've tried to focus on multi-year funding, and you've learned that unrestricted funding also tends to be what the local organizations need. So I want to turn it over to Devin. So Devin, you work in a network with multiple both funders and ESOs. So you're kind of sitting right in the middle of this. And not every funder operates the way Seagull does. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and what Andy is doing to try and change the general approach.
Sure, thanks, Mary. Yes, every funder does not operate the way Seagull Foundation does. So we are very grateful that those kinds of organizations exist in the world. I would say, so Andy is a network organization. We have about 300 members who support entrepreneurs in all sorts of different capacities, as incubators, accelerators, business development service providers, as well as impact investors and education institutions, and then the funding community that supports all of these people in different ways. One of the things we've done more often lately is to actually step in as a funder ourselves, because we have been able to raise money especially from development agencies, to do re-granting facilities for a variety of objectives to try and drive the sector forward in different ways. And one of the things we actually evaluated over the last year was we've been doing regranting in some capacity for about 10 years. Initially, the impetus was just to get more money into the sector generally. So it raised the profile of this type of entrepreneurial work in the development sector. But we realized, okay, well, it's been 10 years. The sector is pretty well established at this point. There's lots of people out there doing their own fundraising. But what's the need that remains in the space? And we realized actually the need is, our long-term vision is to have locally led ecosystems where organically new actors come up and they scale their organizations and they provide the support that entrepreneurs need. And that over time, outside assistance or organizations who work internationally become less necessary. And so what we realized when we looked at the people who are winning our awards is it was a lot of very familiar names, big organizations with an international presence who are already themselves pretty well established. And that was not achieving what we thought was the most impactful goal at the time. So we revised a lot of processes for how we go about those facilities, the application process. I mean, one of the things we've always done is had local experts make the final selections for those facilities so that the people who are actually saying, yes, you get funded and no, you don't get funded are the ones who would be closest to the work on the ground and have the best perspective about what's important and what's good quality work. We've also introduced a two-stage application process because, I mean, one of the things we found is many of these earlier stage organizations, the two colleagues we have here are actually have been around a while, have had a lot of success, but there are many smaller earlier stage organizations that don't have professional fundraising staff, for example. And so having a two-stage application that starts with like an expression of interest, and then we actually help them in some cases develop that into a full proposal was really transformational. I mean, the first time we implemented that process, our average regranting facility before that, it got about 50 to 100 applications. First time we ran it, it got 250 applications. And the second time we ran it, it got 575. For an organization of 300 different institutions, to realize that there's 575 organizations out there interested in running these kinds of programs was pretty eye-opening to us. So those are a couple of the things we've done. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay. Great. So you mentioned a two-step application process and having local selection teams, which also includes people who are actually doing the work on the ground. So that's an interesting point as well. So I want to bring in the two that you mentioned. So AMI and Village Capital have been around for a long time, and they've also been doing the work of ESOs for a long time. And more recently, you've gotten into the space of supporting other ESOs to improve their effectiveness and their ability to attract funding as well. So let me start with you, Lillian. Tell us a little bit about what AMI is doing to support ESOs.
Thank you so much, Mary. At AMI, we provide solutions to demand-driven problems in partnership with like-minded organizations. And our capacity also as a Pan-African ESO equips us to train, to upskill, to develop tools that assist local ESOs in their work. For example, we've worked in partnerships with the BMW Foundation, where we designed and delivered a business resilience program, dubbed Survive to Thrive, to 18 impact hubs in Africa, where we equipped them with practical tools, skills, and networks that would help them navigate the challenging COVID-19 business environment. We have also worked on two programs with DGGF and Village Capital to support local ESOs. In our first program, we offered a management development program to middle-level managers working in local ESOs. And in our second program, we designed and delivered business survival bootcamps to local ESOs. I believe that Rachel from Village Capital, who is also in the panel, will speak to these programs. We have also worked with the Arab Women Enterprise Fund, where we equipped local ESOs in Egypt with a diagnostic tool to assist them while assessing SME needs. Longer term, our goal is to set quality standards for BDS support across various African markets. For example, we are now in discussions with the government of Uganda in partnership with the private sector to design and set national BDS standards specific to their local context, with which local ESOs can reference as they support small and growing businesses. So in summary, what I can say is that our capacity as a Pan-African ESO allows us to be able to respond to challenges that local ESOs face, given that we understand the context in which they operate. And to speak to what has already been highlighted is that there is a need for local understanding and also contextual responses and solutions that would help these local ESOs to do well within the markets.
Okay, before I move to Rachel, so Lillian, from perspective, from the all the programs that you've talked about, as you're one of these ESOs, what would you say is the most prevalent or most common challenges these ESOs have with regards to both their programs and attracting funding?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Mary. We have noted 4 key learnings so far. First, in our business growth programs, we highlighted the need to strengthen the business and operational capabilities for local ESOs, something that has been spoken to by Barbara and also by Peter. We also realized through our management development programs that there is a need for local ESOs to strengthen their teams. And thirdly, we also realized that there's a need for local ESOs to provide value in their programs. And as such, it is paramount that they have access to tools and resources to help them support local businesses. Finally, we realized that a whole system approach is required to support local ESOs in partnership with like-minded organizations, including governments. And so that's the space where now the Segal Foundation, Andy, and other organizations play a key role.
Okay. So over to you, Rachel. Tell us about some of the programs that you have run to support local ESOs and what you're also seeing with regards to what the common challenges are. And also what.
I can start with the challenges, just echoing exactly what Barbara said at the beginning. It's really this operating capital for building a strong bench of your team and not living and dying on a program by program basis. But it took us a while to arrive at that conclusion as well. It's been a journey for us. We started in 2016. Village Capital's been around for 12 years now. We run investment readiness programs for entrepreneurs. We use innovative methodologies to disrupt traditional power dynamics for how entrepreneurs get access to capital in order to have more diverse portfolios of impact-driven, diverse entrepreneurs with lived experience. I know that was a kind of a mouthful, but that's where we started. And we were approached actually by some funders of ours and partners of us who looked at our results and investment capital raised, diversity of the portfolio, revenue generated, jobs created. And they said, okay, how do we scale this impact that you're having? And our original hypothesis was, okay, let's go and identify locally led entrepreneur support organizations and train them how to deliver our programming. And that didn't really work. It worked to some extent, but it was that began the journey of, actually, what is the value proposition of locally led organizations? What do they really need in order to be successful? And good quality curriculum, especially targeted like ours, for a specific type of entrepreneur that's trying to raise investment capital, that's been iterated and improved over time, has value. It really does. But when you dig into it, what you're hearing is things like Andy was saying and Barbara and Peter is actually what these organizations need is support with strategic planning and building a strong team and access to funding for multi-year funding for their operations. So they themselves can decide, okay, what's my target entrepreneur? How do I adequately support them? How do I adapt to the local needs? How do I build curriculum and products that suit those needs? And all of that needs oxygen and needs space in which to maneuver. And that requires funding that is decided by the leaders of that organization. So we run an ESO accelerator now. We worked in partnership with Argidius to build it. But it's not prescriptive. It's built very similar to our startup accelerator on a diagnostic. There are some technical expertise sessions, which is at the discretion of the ESO, as Andy said, to, is this something you're interested in? Here's a technical expert. Here's some stuff we know about it. Are you interested in it? Especially kind of impact measurement or team building. But the majority of the work is with an analyst and it's with each other, and it's using a diagnostic that we've built based on what are the typical stages of growth for ESOs and what milestones are they reaching at different stages of growth to access different types of funding from development partners. So taking this very opaque relationship between ESO and development partner or grantor and trying to make what the due diligence criteria of the funder is more transparent, so that locally led ESOs are kind of meeting, going into these conversations and these proposals with a bit more knowledge about what's expected and where they might have risks that they can then speak to when they're proposing for funding. Yeah, but really team building, talent. We worked with AMI on a mid-level manager program and the Dutch Good Growth Fund, saw massive impact there, just unlocking some time for people like Barbara to go out and think about strategy and raise money and to help with that mid-level implementation department lead team level to empower them to take on more leadership, to take on more autonomy and deliver programming. We saw huge impact from that program. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, so I know both Peter and Barbara have participated in some of the programs that the two of you have mentioned. So let me start with you, Peter. Why did you seek out this particular program, and what would you say was the biggest benefit for Bongo Hive?
So when we took up the program and when I participated in it, first of all, I think it was a time when I was getting into a new position, and I think there was also obviously identified that there were some gaps in my own public leadership style and also learning how to manage various programs. And a lot of programs were coming into Bongo Hive at that specific time. And obviously, in terms of leadership, it was always important to really not really run the programs, but manage the programs in a sense. So having been in the program, I think was very beneficial. And because we were in a cohort, and cohort of ESOs in Africa, it was quite important to cross-learn. So you know what somebody's doing in Uganda, I said, oh, I'll probably try and implement that. How do you sort out this problem in Malawi? How do you sort out this problem? How do you sort it out in Ghana? And so you're then able to kind of try and implement what others have done before you in a different space. Either you're trying to enter into that space or you're in the space, but you're having challenges. And being able to communicate those challenges and learn ways in which to solve them has been very helpful. I think there are a lot of tools that AMI has provided. I was been telling Lillian the other day that we still continue to use those tools to help you run and your programs more efficiently. And also those tools are not only specific, for instance, to ESOs, but can also be applied to the SMEs and businesses and startups that we support, right? So it's not just for ESO specific, but using those same tools to make businesses better and help them run smoothly has been very, very helpful.
How about you, Barbara? I know you went through the VILCAPS program. So what would you say were your key takeaways from that program?
For us, it was the M&E piece helping us, because one of the things that funders, of course, want to see is the impact that you have as an organization. So being able to track impact or data that matters is one of the key things that we got out of this. The ability to have experts help us work through. We have tons and tons of data, but being able to analyze that data and get meaningful information out of it that you can clearly share with funders was very key for us. But also the viral assessment was very key for us. Having existed for all these years, we kind of knew where we were as an organization, but not really too well. So going through all those levels and looking at, okay, when it comes to team, here's where we are. It helped us identify where the gaps are and who do we need to bring on board, and also the guys that are already within the team. What do we need to do to get us to the next level? Because it has different kinds of levels. So those are the main things that it helped us in. But also being a grantee of SIGO, there's something that SIGO did in 2019, 2020. I think it started in 2018, Andy, I'm not too sure. But doing an organizational capacity assessment. So usually that happens before someone funds you. But if you've built a relationship with a funder where you trust them that they're out to help you grow as an organization, and they say, hey, we want to bring in these external guys to kind of look through your organization inside out and help you identify where your gaps are and grow. I think at first it was very scary, but having gone through it, we were able to understand literally where we are as an organization, the recommendations that came in of what you need to do to be able to style up in the different areas, so that any other funder who's coming on board will not find the same gaps that these guys have found. So for us, I think that was also very, very key. Like now, I'm very confident that any funder who walked into our organization would not find the gaps that those guys came in and found. So when they came back this year around September, and they did an assessment again, they said we had moved 73% of all the gaps that they had identified. So for me, that was also a point where we're like, yeah, MasterCard or whoever wants to come in can now come in and do an assessment. And I'm sure they would find us the growth level that we have had since then. Then when we added the village capital training, it was really a point of growth for us, and also in terms of building our team's capacity. Yes.
Okay, great. So Andy, they've mentioned the organizational capacity assessment that Seagull Family Foundation does. And earlier you talked about your approach to capacity building for your partners. So my question would be around capacity building for fundraising. So that continues to be a challenge for many ESOs. How does Seagull see this? What are you doing to support your partners to access funding beyond Seagull?
May I answer before Andy? Oh, sorry.
Oh, go for no. Oh, you.
Great.
Sorry.
Tell me the actual user experience.
Yeah, one of the key things that having SIGO as a partner has done for us is one, the introductions to other funders. I have been able to collect more funding into the organization because of SIGO saying, hey, there's this conference that's happening. Do you want to go for it? And when you go and read up on it, who's coming? You're like, yes. And then SIGO is like, there's so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so that's coming. Do you want an introduction to them? Like they give you all this pre-info that you need to know about a person. They've walked into meetings with us. I would say having SIGO as a partner has helped us raise funding that if we didn't have them, would not have done. And then the Africa Visionary Fund Fellowship, that we went through was also one that helped us look into our organizations in terms of, okay, when you're going into these meetings, do you just walk in? And this is speaking from experience. I had attended conferences before that had tons and tons of funders, but didn't know how to navigate. You see so many people, you walk in and you attend the sessions and go back home without even speaking to people because you're either afraid. But having been taught by the different people that SIGO brought into the Africa Visionary Fellowship to say, okay, here's what you need to do. Here's what we are seeing from others. And also bringing in other businesses that had gone through that had succeeded or navigated this successfully, coming to talk to us about how they did it and also allowing us to ask them questions really helped me that now I know if I'm going for a conference, I know how to structure myself. And even if I didn't get a chance to go for a conference and meet this person in person, I know how to structure my emails, how to follow up, like simple things that you'd think people know, but how soon should you follow up after speaking to someone? Okay, if they don't respond, what do? Do you just give up? And those are the things that we used to do, but now I know how to structure my conversations. It's called, SIGO calls it the donor dancing or something like that, where you know how to pursue respectfully and be able to get what you want from a funder. Thanks. Andy.
Yeah, what Barbara said. No, but there's a funders hold all the power, but also have secret superpowers, which is we have a lot of influence. Our vouchers go a long way, for better or worse, right? So it behooves us to have good taste in organizations that we support and we promote and we cheerlead. And yeah, we realized that a few years back, and now it feels like common sense, but we need to be active promoters of our partners. That's the number one piece of capacity building, as it were, we can do. So we are actively making introductions, supplying folks with diligence when we have a favorable view of an organization. We're trying not to do any harm, obviously. And figuring out ways through our convening and our community building to put awesome visionary leaders like Barbara on a platform in the right lighting, so that they shine. You know, it's pretty straightforward. And, you know, I think amongst the Western philanthropic set of funders, people are hungry for pipeline. Gosh, especially in the last 2 years when site visits are not not real. I was on a call last month with about 30 mostly American funders, and someone asked, who's been on a site visit in the last 12 months? And I was the only person that raised my hand amongst 30 people, all of whom are actively pursuing new grantee relationships. And that's, so you've got to figure out ways around, this distance that we've created. Oh, we've not created.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder to those who are joining us on the session, please feel free to add any questions you have to the chat, and I'll be coming to those shortly. So I want to turn to Devin. So Devin is sitting in a really unique position where you are both the person raising the funds from funders, and you're also deploying funds. And I know that Andy has a learning lab for funders who are members of Andy. How or what would you say are some of the common themes that you hear from the funders that you can share with us that would help local ESOs become better dance partners? I like that donor dance. I'll use that. Thank you, Barbara. How can local ESOs become better dance partners from what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think so. We, in addition to running our funder learning lab, we also occasionally do, well, back when we could travel, do some sessions with members about their own fundraising processes and the things that are helpful to know. I think one of the things I've learned from those kinds of conversations is most people very much undervalue or misunderstand that relationships are the most important part of the fundraising process, that actually talking to someone and being open and honest about your work and being able to express it clearly to them with confidence is one of the key hurdles. And that power dynamic that exists there can be very hard to overcome. And so it's not something you can just do with an intuitive feel. One of the things I would say, I think there's some really great examples from this session about how we can do this work better. I know there's also probably a lot of people who work for funders, sometimes large development agencies and things like that, that don't have the flexibility to approach things with this kind of creative mindset. For those people, I would advocate to you, there's a couple of things I think you could do that would be more helpful to these kinds of situations. One is in the selection criteria that you use to evaluate decisions. So if you can actually grant to these kinds of organizations at a relatively early stage and smaller ticket size, which some of you can't, but if you can, the criteria that we use as part of our screening is, is this project run by a locally headquartered organization, or is it a branch office of an international institution of some kind? That should be a factor in how you think about this. Operating budgets, we're looking to support especially operating budgets that are under $500,000 US a year. Those tend to be the ones that have a little bit harder time reaching into large scale funder, accessing those opportunities. What percentage of the lead organization's leadership is an expat? That's also a factor, because even locally headquartered organizations are often led by expat founders, and that is a factor in whether that organization is really advancing local leadership. Some of them do a great job of that, and even with a mixture of leadership, but others do not. And then things like whether they're the number of women they have on their team, and whether they're based in an urban center or on the periphery or in a rural setting. Those are also things that get overlooked, where we need organizations to support entrepreneurs of all types and all geographies. And those are major gaps that form. And then also I would just advocate, you've heard too, from both our perspective at Andy and from BuildCap's perspective, there are intermediated approaches to supporting these organizations that don't require you to be able to do all of this work yourself. If you can't make those smaller, those harder asks of how to deliver this money to people working on the ground, you can work with organizations like us. You can work with BuildCap to do capacity development services with these organizations so that they will have more access to donors like you in the future. So those are things I would just advocate to people to consider and how they do their work.
Yeah, I just want to jump in really fast with to echo what Devin said. Is one of when we were learning about and listening and interviewing so many ESOs and funders to really understand what our value proposition needed to be over the years, one of the things that came up as a drawback and a barrier for funders was managing a very large portfolio of small grants. So that's one of the problems that we're trying to solve for the funders is, how do we distribute smaller grants on your behalf so that the organizations get to a stage where they meet your due diligence criteria and can absorb the capital that you're able to disperse at the size that you're restricted to. So there are people trying to solve that problem, but really it is important that funding goes to locally led organizations. Otherwise they can't get to the stage where they are able to absorb the larger ticket sizes. That's just kind of the catch-22 that we're in right now.
Great. So we've heard a lot about some of the different approaches that have been taken. SIGA, from Andy's perspective, what Village Capital is doing, what AMI is doing, and even had from Hive Collabs and Bongo Hive's own experience about what's actually working. But if local ESOs already now had access to funding, then we wouldn't be here having this session. So clearly something still needs to be done. So to come back to Peter and Barbara and just hear from you. So what do you think still needs to be done? Like, what would you like to see more of, both from the funders and from the ecosystem more broadly?
If I can go first, I think Andy already spoke about what we need. One, unrestricted funding. And when I say unrestricted, I'm not saying first build a relationship of trust with the ESOs that you're working with, and trust them that when you give them unrestricted funding, they're not going to play football with the money. They're actually going to deliver impact with the money. And feel free to track that or phase, what is the word? Bring it in installments, milestone delivery or whatever it is, but trust the organization that you're working with. Two, multi-year. It's very hard. Majority of the funding that's available is 1-year funding. And it's hard for you to grow your programs or your organization if you're running every single year, every single month. As a leader of an organization, you're thinking, okay, if this ends, maybe this ends next June, then we are going to either have to close this program, regardless of the impact that you're making on this program or the number of people that are coming and are interested in that program. You're thinking, okay, this is going to close. Two, if you had brought on capacity, if you had brought on extra, let's say, facilitators, you've trained them. If this 1-year grant ends, that means they're going to go away, so you've lost. Then the next funder that comes, if that person is still available, then you're lucky. If they are not, then that means you're going to have to bring in new people, train them all afresh, and then you're going to lose them when that closes. So multi-year funding is very important. Two is unrestricted funding. It can be, let me rephrase, it doesn't have to be unrestricted, but most funders don't want to recognize the fact that you have rent to pay, that you have accounts teams or even internet, like the operational costs. Most of them don't want to recognize that. Or they'll say, you can't go beyond 10% or 15% of whatever you're asking for. It can never suffice. So unless you have a funder who is saying, okay, for us, we shall do general costs and you're not worrying about that, even if they give you $1 million and it's restricted, you're still going to struggle in that area of your organization. You can't bring on the level of capacity. Lillian was talking about creating standardized kind of curriculums or BDS support. For you to be able to offer that, you need to have a budget that you can bring on quality people. We have a shortage of quality people or people who are able to provide quality services that even if someone went to, after going through your accelerator, they went to a Y Combinator or wherever, they would say, yeah, this is the same thing that Hive Collab gave me. So for you to be able to do that, you need to bring in quality people. In my experience, these guys are not less than 1,500 per month. Now, if the funder is telling you, if the grant is 200K and they're saying you can't do more than 10%, that means that is 20,000. Yeah. And so if you're to bring in 3 facilitators that are really good, you can't sustain them. So multi-year funding and then also capacity building. Sometimes the challenges that a funder will say we are not going to fund you for is something, okay, maybe it's not their mandate, but it's something really small that if they worked with you in this partnership, it's a capacity you can build in 6 months or even less. So let's say you come in and you find our M&E is not really that good. Like, yes, we've collected lots of data, but the way we are arranging this data or translating is not good, then there is a capacity problem in there. You can select 5% is going to, of the grant I'm going to give you is going to go to someone coming in to help you with this. I think many ESOs would be very open and actually very happy to receive such support than someone saying, no, you're not yet there. And also, I love the point that Rachel talked about where some funders are really large that they can't fund you as a small organization. If let's say your budget is below 500K or whatever amount that they are limited to, kind of grouping or allowing groups of ESOs to come together or under an organization like Village Capital to support, to work with these businesses to grow their capacity. Because if you're saying, oh, I can't support you because you're not yet at 500K, and that's what everyone is saying, how am I going to get to 500K if no one is willing to help me get there? So yeah, for me, that's it.
Yeah, well said, Barbara, I think. So I will not also repeat what you've said, but I'll just also say that I think understanding the context, the funders need to understand the context that they're operating in. And especially you find that you may get the grants, but some of the reporting requirements may not be feasible down in the ground. Some of the expect to report probably similar to what's probably done in America or in Europe. And yet some of those things, you won't have them here. For instance, maybe some people might not have certain type of documentation, depending on where it is, maybe because it's in a rural area, and that will not be possible. So I think having that flexibility where you communicate with the ESO and they explain to you what is feasible, and avoiding this where you find you have an M&E from the funder who just comes and says, we need this data, we need information. So you find a lot of the time you find is spent in trying to firefight and go back and forth and arguing a report or an M&E report. Instead of actually doing the work that you're supposed to be doing, you spend so much time on this. But so if we could understand each other for the program start, get the context. Another part I think I'll also state is that a lot of the sometimes, especially when you're going into greenfield programs or spaces, it would be to understand the context once again that you're in. I know we've had sometimes programs like where they'll say we need half the program to be women and this technology, but the reality on the ground is, and this is probably even worldwide, that there are few women in STEM spaces. So if you ask for a requirement that you need to have 50% a cohort should be women, we will also have it a challenge, right? And so that opportunity to learn and nurture that 50% should be available. And this is where the multi-year funding would come in, because then you'd educate people, apply the knowledge and build this capacity from the grassroots. So that when you then say 3 years later and said, okay, we want 50% women in the program for, let's say, for instance, EdTech or FinTech, we can give it to you because we have nurtured and cultivated. But sometimes what we find is that a good number of funders would want already established, in a sense, startups or SMEs who have done already, other people have done the work for them, and then they could then put them on their portfolio that, oh, we've done so much. But I think we need also more funders to be cognizant or aware of the fact that sometimes we may need to really go from the grassroots. And I think, once again, iterating Barbara's point of multi-year funding does really well in that space.
Awesome. I want to jump to the chat really quickly, just so that we don't miss the questions. So Lillian, there's a question for you regarding the support to building standardized BDS curriculum. So the question is, does it have normative regulatory implications for ESOs operating in a specific sector or targeting a particular market segment?
That's a good question. So this is a project that we are currently developing and working on in partnership with the government of Uganda and the private sector. And so we are really at the formative stages. So once we have been able to agree on the things that we want to do, then we would go about it, talking to the different local ESOs, talking to the different players, talking to the different businesses that are based in Uganda for that context, to find out what type of support do they need, what can be designed and what can be provided by the local ESOs to them that would be of value to see their businesses grow and move to the next level, and then involve the local ESOs probably in working groups to also hear from them what are the challenges challenges? Are they having challenges with funding? Are they having challenges with access to tools? Are they having challenges with access to facilitators, or even determining which curriculum would be beneficial to the enterprises within their local context? And then being able to co-create together with the government having oversight, and together with the private sector's oversight as well, to determine how can we address these challenges that they're facing? How can we develop national standards that are acceptable to the local ESOs and that would have their buy-in, so that they can at a minimum refer to this framework or these standards when they're designing their curriculum, so that the businesses that are supported within that country context can survive and can be able to create jobs and thrive for many years to come.
Okay, in addition to that question, there's one that's kind of related.
Okay.
So how are you engaging local Ugandan ESOs in this process?
I think that would be the plan, is that we to design something that is effective and that makes sense to the local ESOs, it would be important for us to have their buy-in. Still, we are in the early formative stages. We have not yet kicked off the program. We should be kicking it off probably towards the end of this year or early next year. And we are still in the modalities and thinking through how this standards can be set in a way that there is local buy-in from the local ESOs, because they are the ones that we are seeking to capacitate, and that the ones that we are seeking to have an impact in supporting them as they support the local businesses within the Uganda country context.
Okay, sounds good. So there are lots of different comments, just agreeing with some of the things that have been said on the panel, so I won't read those. But Devin, did you have something to say?
I just wanted to weigh in a little bit on the M&E point that was made by Peter and Barbara. I mean, so the challenge they mentioned earlier about, no one wants to pay for operational costs. Typically, one of the last operational costs to be added in an organization's growth trajectory is an M&E specialist. So almost nobody at this stage of development has someone who does that for their job as their whole day. It's really one of the biggest hurdles for working with, for people's perspective. Some of the regranting facilities we work on are funded by USAID, right? Getting a grant from USAID requires basically a lot of M&E ability, but virtually none of these organizations that we want to serve have it. So we don't even think much about their M&E strategy on their applications to our facility, because we know we're going to help them. We're going to say, okay, these are the things that we have to measure. Here's how you do it. Here's the template you fill out. If they fill it out wrong, we'll go back with them and figure it out. And earlier in the negotiation process with the donor, we also have to advocate for them and say, these are not reasonable measures. You can't ask these people to measure this stuff. It's not what their core business is about. It's not going to help them. These are just your sort of impact objectives. And so we have to have that, we have a full-time measurement and impact director who has worked at USAID and can go back to them and say, these are ridiculous. You can't ask people to measure this stuff. Just imagine the position that a local ESO is in that same conversation, trying to actually push back about what they're being asked to measure. So that's just a really crucial point that people should be aware of.
Yes, and I think it just goes to show the importance of the intermediation as one of the ways to help local ESOs access more funding. So actually, now that we're there, I'd like us, because we don't have a lot of time left, I'd like to see if I can attempt to summarize some of what we have discussed today. So it's been a really rich conversation. I have a really good idea of some of the things that work after hearing what you all had to say. So in terms of what's working and what works, based on all of your combined experience, having local selection committees whenever you have a call for proposals out is effective. Multi-year funding is effective, and restricted funding that takes into account the cost of people, the cost of M&E, the cost of rent, the cost of all these different things is an approach that more funders need to take. Having a two-step application process, where after the initial expression of interest, then especially when it's an intermediated process, the local ESO can be assisted in developing the final proposal, has been effective in getting more ESOs funded. Then we have also talked about the organization capacity assessment that Seagull Family Foundation does. And I think for me, what was interesting about that is the point at which that assessment happens. So as opposed to before the relationship formally begins, with Seagull, it happens after Seagull has built trust with the partner, and the partner is able to open up and talk and really talk about what are some of the gaps in their organization, and repeating that organizational assessment to make sure that by the time the funding relationship ends, they leave the organization not just having achieved some program goals, but at basically making them a stronger organization as they head on to the next funder. Then I really liked the conversation around introducing ESOs to funders, so being active promoters of partners, and this is specifically for funders. And one thing that I know from experience is that funding is really about relationships. And a lot of the reasons why local ESOs are not able to access funding is because they don't have access to those networks, but their funders do. So if their funders were actively promoting them, then they would allow them to unlock more funding. Then I also had a lot about like being intentional about selecting for local ESOs. So some of the selection criteria, I think this is Devin who brought it up. You look at whether the organization is locally led, the percentage of the organization's leadership that are experts. You also look at the operating budgets and trying to select for organizations that are smaller, so below the $500,000 a year range, who are likely to struggle more to access funding. Then I've also heard a lot about the intermediated approaches, both from Andy and from Village Capital as well, as having been quite effective, and it's something that we'd like to see more of. So with regards to what still needs to be done, I think Barbara and Peter have talked a lot about this. So it's more of what's working. So more unrestricted funding, more multi-year grants, more capacity building, like more intentional capacity building, allowing for more intermediated funding, like what Andy and Village Capital are trying to do, and also for consortiums, more funding of consortiums. Then I think we also heard about having funders that understand local context. So with regards to reporting requirements, with regards to program design as well. So that's important. So I've tried to summarize what I've heard, but I'm sure I might have missed something. Is there anything anyone on the panel would like to add as we go to closing?
I'd just like to reiterate what something that Barbara and Peter said is the unrestricted funding helps build the curriculum and the impact measurement framework and the team and the facilitation capacity. Like it makes stronger, sustainable, high quality, locally adapted organizations. Just that's kind of what really resonated is, I think unrestricted can be so scary, but it's the leaders of these organizations that know what they need to do and what they need to prioritize, and how they're going to build a sustainable organization that isn't just based on the programs that are coming to them, as Barbara really emphasized, but on the programs that they know will make impact in their ecosystem, because they're the ones that have the direct access to the entrepreneurs on a day-to-day basis.
On my part, I feel like what I feel is really important also for the local ESOs is to have what I think Seagull is really trying to do, and Andy as well, is to have partners that actually see the value in these programs, also having the capacity within their teams to help them move to the next level. So it's just not focused on providing them funding to probably run incubators or train X amount of people or train X amount of businesses, but also have funders who are looking at their internal systems. How are they operating? Do they have great facilitators? Can they be able to develop tools? Just basically having a partner that would work with them to see them grow and support more businesses. And I think that would be something that's quite important for local ESOs to be able to survive.
I think I'll just also steal this from Barbara, where I think it's a partnership. It's not a kind of like a beggar type of relationship. We're trying to deliver a service, right? And then the question is always, I think for me, it's an ecosystem. It's not just us and the funders, but they're also the SMEs who invest their time into these programs, right? So if you're going to do a 2-week, 1-month program, the business will say, I do it, then what? You then just dump me and leave me. You'd have ticked your boxes, all of you. You'd have got your money and left. But there are lives behind the funding itself that we really want to impact. And therefore, I think taking that into consideration as we design programs, as we seek for funding is, I think, very, very, very important.
For me, my takeaway is for funders or to work with funders to co-create the programs. I think that would build better trust for multi-year unrestricted funding if we have co-built rather than a funder just coming in and seeing what you want to do or telling you what they want to do. But if we co-build a program, then it might be easier for them to be open to multi-year funding and unrestricted funding, and also building a relationship rather than just say every 6 months, send me a report and then you never even hear back anything about the report. So kind of creating that kind of relationship where you're working with the business, understanding where their challenges are, so that if it needs changing or changing a few things in the program early on, rather than reach at the very end where the program, the report is showing you only 50% was achieved and there are issues. Let's build this together and work together so that if there's need for change, we change it together because we both understand the landscape. We understand what's going on within the ecosystem. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. We need to close now. So I just want to say a big thank you to all the panelists for sharing so succinctly and so openly. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this goes in the coming years. So a reminder to everyone who's joining us on the platform, the closing session will start at 12:30 CST. So I'm hoping you can join us then. And thank you for joining us, for the comments on the chat as well. And I'm sure all the panelists would be open to continuing this conversation offline as well with anybody who's interested. So thank you, everyone. And I hope to have this conversation again soon once more funders are funding more local ESOs to talk about what we are learning with regards to what's working. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks, Barbara, Peter.
Thanks, Mary.
Lillian.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.